Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing ghost stories from Michigan. Let's get into it. Story 1. I was home one afternoon by myself, watching TV. I thought I had heard something in the kitchen, so I looked up and I froze. There stood a man that I had never seen before, yet he seemed very familiar to me. I couldn't move or say anything. I'm not sure how long I sat there staring at this man, but the next thing I knew he was gone. My doors were all locked. No one could have come in. After that I saw shadows and things out of the corner of my eye, but he never showed himself to me like that again. Several weeks later I was at home with my parents, brother, and niece and nephew. My dad and brother were standing at the counter. They wanted to show my mom and I something, so we looked in at them and carried on. Later that night, after everyone had gone, my mom and I were talking, and she asked me if I had seen anything weird when we had looked at the guys. I said yes, why? She said she had seen a little girl with long blonde hair standing between them smiling. I saw the same little girl. My niece and nephew were in the living room at the time and looked nothing like this little girl, so we know it wasn't either of them. Story 2. My dad used to work at the American Legion at night, cleaning the building. He was the only one working, so sometimes I would go with him. One night, me and my friend Ashley went with him, and we were playing around in the blue room. There was a bar and a lot of tables and things like that. I was standing by the liquor room and just messing around, tapped on the door. Then all of a sudden, someone tapped back, and with a different pattern than I tapped. I looked at my friend almost to say, "Did you hear that?" And she looked at me, and I could tell by the look on her face that she was very scared. We both ran out of the room, and just as we got to the door, something grabbed Ashley's leg. She screamed and pulled away, and we ran into the room across the hall. And when we looked back, there was nothing there. So we sat down, and she pulled up her pant leg, and her knee was all red and blotchy. We were so freaked out that we never went in that room again unless there were a lot of people with us. Another time, me, my friend Ashley, and my sister went to work with my dad, almost to see if anything else would happen. We were sitting in the bingo hall when we heard this loud screeching sound, so we went to the main hall to see if we could find where the sound was coming from. We looked into the blue room, and there was a chair dolly used to move stacked chairs on the dance floor, so we went over to it, and there were scratch marks on the floor behind it, like someone had pushed it. So I pushed it about a foot to see what it sounded like, and it sounded exactly the same as we heard. Later that night, me, my sister, and Ashley were on the stairs of the building, messing around with a copy machine, when my dad came down and said, "You guys are down here? Then who's flushing the toilets?" It turns out then, when we were downstairs and my dad was upstairs, he had been hearing people running down around the bathrooms, flushing the toilets. So I read up on the American Legion a little bit and found out that it had been used as a hospital for injured soldiers during World War II. There are a lot more things that have happened to me and other people I know, and I will be sharing those stories soon. Story 3. I moved to a new house 9 months ago to stay with a friend of the family while I was going to college. The house seemed mostly normal, aside from a few bumps in the night, until about a month ago. The first thing happened when I was sleeping. The woman I live with, who doesn't believe in ghosts, woke me up and asked me if I had turned the television on. I hadn't used the television in a few days as I don't really watch that much TV, and it was a completely random occurrence, so the TV couldn't have been set on a timer or it would have been turning on and off the same time every day. So we dismissed it for a time and went to bed. A few days later, I was cleaning the house when I heard a woman singing. There was no radio on, and I was the only person in the house. I went to see what it was and realized it was coming from the basement area. I stood next to the basement door and listened for a minute. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs from the basement. I opened the basement door and there was no one there. Shortly after that, maybe a half hour later, I was eating lunch and the television turned on and then off. I sort of just disregarded it because it wasn't that big of a deal and I love the paranormal. A A few seconds later, a woman's voice started talking in the back bedroom, so I went to see if maybe the TV was on, and it wasn't. There was no one in the room, and I was home alone. I called my mom to talk to her about it so I wouldn't feel creeped out. After that, not much happened for a few days, and then about a week and a half later, I was cleaning the bedrooms and waiting for my friend to call. She said she would call around noon, so I said okay, and just cleaned while I waited. It was about 1 p.m., and I decided to call her to see what she was doing. She said she had called and someone else had picked up the phone, and she could hear a TV in the background, and then the phone was hung up. I thought maybe she had gotten the wrong number, but then she said she would hang up and hit redial because nobody else had made any phone calls since, but the phone didn't ring. A few seconds later, my phone rang. I was on the phone with her, and I happened to walk by the basement door, and I heard voices, so I went down the stairs and found the basement television on. There's a phone in the basement of my house because my roommate's son used to stay down there, so she put a phone in for him. Someone answered my phone from the basement, and I was the only person in the entire house. The TV in the basement had also not been used for at least a couple of weeks. It was definitely not set on a timer, and the remote was on the shelf. I think a woman stays in my basement. She sings sometimes and I hear her walk around. I like her and think she's friendly. Ghosts don't have to be scary. She seems nice and has a pretty singing voice. Sometimes I go downstairs and talk to her, but nothing happens. Then when I go back upstairs, she'll start making noise again. Story 4. I don't know really how the whole story came to effect, but it's all true. I live in St. Clair, Michigan, and I'm a freshman at SCHS. I've always believed in the supernatural, magic, and etc., but I was ignorant to think that nothing special or odd would present itself to me. I had been home alone at the time, sitting in my room, which is in the far corner of my house. My door led out into a hall that branched into two other rooms, a bathroom, then eventually my kitchen and living room. I was sitting in my room at making bracelets out of yarn and watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer when I heard a knock at my door. Now I figured my parents were home, or it was a sibling, but I had heard the front door. I remember getting up and going to the door to check, and no one was there. Peeved, thinking it was the cats, I had moved down to the hall to check the rooms to see if it had been one of my cats, which I have 3 by the way. I went into the living room, and 2 of my cats were lounging out in the window, watching the cars pass by. The third was asleep, so it wasn't them. At that moment I remembered being cold, and something shoved me. Now I was scared. I turned to see a shadow type thing disappear. I remembered being so terrified but unable to move. My cats also had been acting strange. My one cat Zippo was whining up a storm, almost howling. I ran into my room again, locking my door. Good move, I had said to myself. A door is sure going to stop a dead person, but I wasn't exactly sure. So I had gone to sit on my bed when the door was knocked on. Now I wasn't moving. Soon it sounded like someone was stopping up and down the hall, having a good old time from the sound of it too. I had turned the volume up, but the more I did, the louder and more aggressive the pounding became, until I had yelled for whatever it was to go away, how it wasn't welcome, and to leave me immediately. In the hall the stomping had stopped after one final smash. Now I didn't leave my room. My parents eventually came home, and they weren't happy. Turned out in the hall, all the picture frames and their glass was busted, and where the final stomp had been, I had found a penny. Let's just say I didn't sleep that night. Story 5. When I met my friend Kristen, I'll admit I thought she was a little crazy when she told me she had a ghost living in her room, so I decided that I would prove her wrong by spending the night in her room with her. As we prepared for bed, nothing strange had happened, so I thought there was no way that something could happen. We sat up for a while and were telling stories. That was when something strange had happened. The whole night my hair had been down and there was no fan blowing, but I felt what I presumed to be a human hand slide under my hair, caress the back of my neck, flipping my hair out as it pulled away. I almost ended up in my friend's lap due to fear. Then to my amazement my friend reprimanded the ghost, and it never bothered me again as long as I was there. A short time later, I found that the small town she lived in was built on an old Indian burial ground, and after that, most of the town had burned down except for two houses, both of which still today stand and belong to other friends of mine. I had slept in both of them, one of them being an old funeral home, and I had always had the eerie feeling that I was being watched, and that feeling increased when my friends and I used a Ouija board at Kristen's house. Story 6. I was maybe 7 to 10 years old when around Christmas I had spent the night at my Aunt Laurie's house to be with my cousins. I was sleeping on one couch and my cousin Emily on another. My Aunt Laurie's rocking chair was at the head of the couch I was sleeping on. My cousin was across the living room. I had fallen asleep and awoke to the sound of the chair clunking. It made very loud noises when it rocked in. I turned my head around to see who was rocking in the chair. No one was there. I got off the couch and touched the part where your butt would be. It was cold, and I was so scared. I then said to whoever was rocking in the chair, "Please stop, you're scaring me." It wouldn't stop. I went to go wake up my Aunt Laurie. She had came out of the room and the chair stopped. She said, "Nothing's wrong, Rachel, go back to bed." As soon as her door had closed, the chair began to rock again. At this point, I was scared. I thought that it was a nice ghost or my Grandma Helen, they would have stopped. I woke my cousin Emily up to go in the next room. She didn't even seem to notice the chair was even rocking. When we get into her room and close the door, the chair began to rock harder and harder, almost violent rocking. I don't know how I went to sleep that night. I think that's the most scared I've ever been in my entire life. I'm now 16 and it bothers me to this day. I've always wanted to find out who was rocking in that chair that night. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.